precious, warm to the eye and cool to the touch. For many of us, it comes with a sunny sense of occasion, like birthday earrings or a wedding ring. But what do we really know about where the gold comes from and what happens during the gold mining process?
This whole area has been turned into basically a desert with these puddles of dirty water, which, as you can imagine, are contaminated by mercury. Next to this, when you're flying over this area, you have these large swaths of emptiness, and next to it, lush rainforest.
Hello and welcome to the Swiss Connection, a Swissinfo production. I'm your host, Susan Masika. What you've just heard is a description of what gold mining is doing to the Peruvian Amazon. It's a region that's struggling to find the balance between preserving the environment and supporting legitimate business. On the other hand, Switzerland is the world's leading gold refiner. But in spite of efforts to make the supply chain more transparent, there are still some big questions about the origins of all this gold and how it's being extracted from the earth. A colleague of mine, Paula Dutra-Dobias, has been investigating gold mining in Peru for several years now. She's been telling me the story behind one of her most in-depth investigations.
I was asked, well, can you actually try to reconstruct the supply chain of illegal gold from the miner back to Switzerland? And that's really something that I've been trying to do for all of these years. And it's extremely difficult to find the illegal miner because none of them, of course, wants to be recognized as doing something illegal because, of course, that would not help them in trying to sell their gold.
Finding people to talk wasn't the only difficult thing about this story. The landscape there is also a challenge to navigate.
We were based in Puerto Maldonado. That's where we were staying. Mm-hmm. And so every time that we had to go to visit these miners, it was very often, 4 or 5 hours by car and boat. So there was the main highway that would take us to a certain point, and then we would have to cross by boat. The Jeep that we were traveling in would have to be then put on a boat, and then we'd travel another hour or two on these little tracks. And the tracks themselves would be very often flooded. And to get to Delta Uno, one of the funny things was that we had to cross this huge river in the 4x4 that we were driving in.
Oh, you mean sort of amphibious style?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was pretty scary. So everybody would get out before just to try to figure out which the best way would be to cross and to sort of prepare themselves mentally for this experience, which was my case.
Otro río.
Otro río? Okay.
¿Se llama Chico o igual de...?
But I thought that it was going to be just impossible to cross this river because what we saw before going in ourselves was that the water would go practically up to the level of the windows.
Jeez.
in the Jeeps, in the 4x4s. And
which are pretty tall, pretty
which
robust.
are pretty tall. And just before we crossed, there was another 4x4 that had flipped over.
Oh.
So we were all hoping that wouldn't occur to us.
But let's get back to Paula's mission, tracing the gold. Part of her research into the gold business took place in Lima, the capital. She met with contacts and tried to figure out the links between the different stages of the supply chain, the links between miners, their local gold trading shops, and exporters. But getting information, or even just getting someone to answer the phone, was challenging.
I tried calling the numbers that were listed either in the shops or online of these gold buyers, gold buying companies, and in most cases the numbers didn't work. The emails, if I could at all find any emails, wouldn't work, but very often it was just phone numbers. Sometimes the names of the companies changed. They would disappear and then reappear as another name. So it was very, very difficult to track them down. What I knew was that if I was going to get any sort of reaction from the gold buyers, I needed to go into the shops and try to speak to them.
Which is what Paula did when she arrived in the jungle and visited the little mining towns there.
So I did enter a number of gold shops, both in Delta Uno, in Waipetue, as well as in Puerto Maldonado, the main town, the capital of Madre de Dios.
And when you say shops, what were they like?
So very often in the smaller towns, these were just rooms, very often with a burner where they were burning the mercury off of the gold, and then like a little stand where people would come in and sell their gold, and
you mean
very, very often you'd see a scale there.
Okay.
I just went into a few of these places, and
but I mean, it was all raw ore. It wasn't, or was it finished?
Oh no,
coins,
you don't see any of the material.
You see none of it. So it's a store, but
it's basically just an office, if you wish, an office with a counter, but you wouldn't see any of the gold. The people going there to sell the gold are people that these shop owners, if you wish, knew. They would have a relationship with them. So,
and then you showed up with no
relationship. And then I showed up, and obviously nobody knew me. I didn't quite look like if I was from there either. Yeah.
But what sort of things then did you hear while you were waiting?
Oh, I mean, there were people coming and going. There were some people who were going into a back office. As they were exiting the back office, they had their little pouches that they were folding up and putting into their pockets. So it seems as if they had sold whatever they had come there to sell.
Interesting.
And finally, when I got to the counter, the manager of the shop was rather upset. After I presented myself as a journalist, he said, well, I shouldn't have been sitting there, that I shouldn't be there. He called somebody else to tell me to leave. And he said that that I was basically trespassing. Huh. And I said, well, I just wanted to be polite and wait my turn. And so he got rather upset and told me that I should call his head office, and which I did. But of course, the phone number that he gave me was not working.
Paula was persistent, and she finally did get someone to talk to her about gold mining in that part of Peru.
It took a very, very long time to try to get the names of anyone who was involved in mining directly in the region. Finally, the people that we did contact were people who we had either known previously, as the case of Walter Baca, who's the nephew of a rather infamous couple from a town called Waipetue, where mining had started in Madre de Dios, where this deforestation and so forth had begun before perhaps other regions, and who I had met his family in 2013 when we went for the first time to Madre de Dios.
Walter Baca is a former miner. He leases equipment to miners trying to formalize their businesses. He himself stopped mining several years ago, after the Peruvian military blew up his equipment during a crackdown on illegal mining. His extended family has been accused of illegal mining and is reported to have had financial ties to Metalor, a Swiss refinery. When Paula met him in Waipetue, Walter didn't want to talk about those allegations, but he was willing to share his insights and experience in the gold trade.
¿Cómo funciona ese negocio, no? Mandan una persona que recoge de todas las tiendas.
They send a person who collects the gold from the shops. They collect a kilo, half a kilo, 2 kilos from each store, and they take it, no invoice.
Son las mismas empresas que cuando llegan a Lima.
These companies pool together their gold in Lima and sell it to one person or company, say Metalor. The gold buyers have concessions. They claim they are producing at their mining concessions. But this isn't true. They have guest workers to create a pretense of producing. Where they actually produce 200 or 500 grams per shift is invoiced as 1 to 2 kilos. But the real production in Waipetue is 50 grams per shift per each shoot.
So he also knew another contact of ours, and it was sort of through that trust that we were able to go and see him. On the other hand, the other miner, the informal miner who we met in Delta Uno, and some of his colleagues, I had taken several weeks to reach because we were given the name of the head of the informal miners in this region.
And when you say informal miner, can you explain what that is for those who aren't so familiar?
So in Peru, there have been efforts for a number of years now by the government to try to figure out what to do with this situation that's really gotten out of hand, as I described, the deforestation and so forth. And these tens of thousands of people who work in artisanal and small mining, if you wish, many of them really are trying to do whatever it takes to feed themselves. I mean, that's the bottom line. And what has happened in the last few years is that the Peruvian government has introduced a program by which it has invited miners to this formalization process. So they...
You mean a license of some sort?
It would be a license. Mm-hmm. But the process has been extremely slow. And last year, the government decided that they wanted to speed it up, that this really did not look good, that things were going so slowly. I mean, bureaucracy in general in Peru is slow, but basically what the miners had to do was to prove that, first of all, that they owned the piece of land or that they had a concession over the piece of land, that they were following certain processes in terms of environmental, respect for the environment, respect for the workers that were mining on that concession, and so forth. But what happened last year was that as a first stage of that process, many of the miners simply registered saying that they wanted to start this process of becoming formalized. So a lot of the miners basically continued doing what they had been doing in the past, and there has been little control. Not to say that the miner who we met in Delta Uno, he has already started introducing a number of processes on his concession. So, for instance, he has a machine that shakes the final substances, the final ore, if you wish, that's collected after he excavates the ore, larger masses of ore, to separate the ore from the gold. This is a process that avoids using mercury.
As Paula was telling me, Juan Tamiña has been mining along the banks of the Puquiri River for nearly 3 decades. His family came to the area in search of a better life. Juan is allowed to mine a section of land within the vast mining corridor. He showed Paula his operation, and told her how it works.
Cumplimos todo lo que dice el Estado.
We abide by everything the state says. The state itself required us to comply with environmental prerequisites in order to follow their regulations. We comply with 80 to 90% of those requirements in order to avoid inspections by authorities. With the documents that the state has given us, we can prove that we're allowed to work here. Only a few of us can work here legally.
Somos pocos mineros, ¿no? Que trabajamos así de manera legalmente.
There were other things that he introduced, like planting trees in a certain part of his concession. Also, respect for certain labor standards as well. So those steps that he took are perhaps not very common in other concessions, in many other concessions in the region. As nice as his operation looked, it didn't necessarily mean that he was able to make a good living from that. I mean, he gave me a breakdown of the expenses that he had between the salaries that he had to pay his workers, the fuel that he needs to power the pumps that are helping him sort of wash through the ore to do the first sort of separation between the bigger stuff and the gold, and other machinery that he needs, trucks and so forth. So he told me that in the end, he's barely making much of a profit. And he also said there's a confusion about how he operates versus the illegal miners and some of the others in the trade.
There are also illegal shops that buy the gold. That's called the black market. We're misunderstood. From the outside, they think we all operate illegally, but it's not like that.
So how do we know whether the gold that ends up in Switzerland, or anywhere for that matter, is clean or dirty? Are there labels that consumers can trust? In an upcoming episode of the Swiss Connection, we'll talk about the Better Gold Initiative and find out what Swiss refiners and traders are doing to support cleaner gold production. So subscribe to this podcast. And if you like what you hear, please give us a review to help other people connect with us. In the meantime, visit us at swissinfo.ch for Paula's long-form story on dirty gold, which has lots of photos and videos from her time in Peru. In fact, her story has been shortlisted for the Fedosov Award for Excellence in Environmental Journalism. On our website, you'll also find all the latest news related to Switzerland and the gold trade. This episode was reported by Paula Duper-Dobias and produced by Paula and me, Susan Masica. Michele Andina is the man behind our music, and Mr. Donnie Wheeler is our sound engineer. You've been listening to The Swiss Connection.
Do you want to polish your knowledge about Swiss elections, referendums, and political parties, while at the same time learning more about the quirks of the political system in Switzerland? If that's the case, our newsletter course is just what you need. Each week for a month, we'll send you a free installment explaining the most important details of how Swiss democracy works. Our course teaches you who's eligible to vote in Switzerland, what the different parties stand for, how election and popular vote results are implemented, and what distinguishes Swiss democracy from other political systems. Our crash course is interactive, like democracy itself. Your questions will be answered on an FAQ page, and you can debate with other users and share your inputs and opinions. We will also provide links to multimedia articles and videos to help you better understand the Swiss democratic system. Please join us and sign up for the free Democracy Crash Course newsletter at www.swissinfo.ch/democracy. That's www.swissinfo.ch/democracy.